All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm the kind of person that would like to think that images like this one, dramatic befores and afters, are optimistic. But I gotta say, whether it's because I hang around a lot with teenagers or because I'm from Missouri, the show-me state, I'm a little more skeptical than that. And so today, I'd like to talk about before, after, and beyond. Now, sometimes you love something a lot, like conservation or design, and you want to think about it like a goodie that's being offered up to the public. But I've learned through hard experience that a better way to start the conversation is to pretend that you're a stranger at the party, desperately trying to talk to anyone. So I'm going to tell you a story like that about Newark, New Jersey. Its riverfront is the reason that there's a city there, like a lot of urban cities. Also, like a lot of riverfronts, it's been the inheritor of a lot of toxic environmental nastiness. This is a list, even partial, of the companies that the EPA has found responsible for the pollution of the river. And if you go there, you'll see a lot of what planners call underutilized property. You might not even think that there's an environment there if you see this view from the beginning of The Sopranos. And all of this is not for lack of planning. You can go back to the early 60s, and when I started the job as the planning director, the mayor gave me this stack, 4 feet tall of plans, many with quite exclusionary ideas about the city, maybe made by the same people that put up this kind of sign that says, "Downtown Newark, yours to rediscover," only a block away from one of the most continuously populated places in the whole state of New Jersey. And this has an impact on environmental infrastructure. So the Army Corps was looking to deal with floods up in the suburbs, and they wanted to build this giant pipe underneath the city. And the way that would look at the city side was this bulkhead, this underground infrastructure, and they sold it by saying that they'd come back to build this public space with these maybe not so inspiring drawings. But if you go there today, this is what you see. Something that doesn't really respond to anyone's desire. So the goal number one of our work was first to make the environment public. Of all those plans, there was one by the Ironbound Community Corporation that took a really different approach. And so inspired by that, rather than one big plan, we made a bunch of plans to see which would get political support. And we set a goal of involving 2% of Newarkers in the remaking of this place. I was ignorant, so I started hanging out with teenagers, making maps, doing interviews. We found amazing stories like public housing tenants that had fought for riverfront access. We saw a really long-standing movement towards environmental justice and organizing around getting riverfront parks. And so as a group, we began to think about what this would look like. And eventually, we made a proposal for what the riverfront would look like in the year 3000. And the mayor came and cut a ribbon. We installed it next to where you pay your water bill, so all those people paying their water bill would maybe think a little bit about it. The young people were taken by the news and put on TV where they said, "These troublesome kids have an idea, and now the city wants to explore this riverfront." We had to deal with the segregation of our city, which is something that also is not unique to Newark. So we tried to find any way to make it seem like an attractive and fun thing to come to this place that was off the map. We offered $5 waterfront tours for 2 hours, and we've had 10,000 people come so far. There, you look and listen, but you also talk with your neighbors about what this place could mean. We also have $100 tours for the high rollers in town, because it's important to reach them, too. On walk shops, we try to peel back the layers that say how this place got this way. And this is how we did for 4 years. But the numbers weren't the important thing. It was about building the relationships, which leads to the second piece of nourishing the regulatory imagination. We knew that the city made a lot of rules about how the environment developed along the riverfront, but hadn't really used a lot of them. So we tried to organize a conversation around 24 basic questions, looking at the neighborhoods upland from the river and how they could have a more productive relationship with the land right along it. We designed a set of Newark zoning workbooks that would take people through this sometimes complex and abstract social technology. And these were designed for use in the basic unit of civil society, the block club, the neighborhood association. It took you through different scenarios, and you could talk about the pros and the cons. Eventually, this led to a citywide resident statement about the future of the riverfront, for the first time, a broad coalition. And the city council passed new zoning that most of all required public access to the riverfront, although some property owners have put that in court. And that leads to the third and final goal, which is building with roots in organized communities. This is not built with roots in organized communities, and that's a problem. So after our boat tours and other kinds of events, we sometimes would have 100 people want to come out and talk about what the first riverfront park would look like. And one of our first moves was to take those old plans, which had focused on the downtown as a place of real estate value, and say, no, our first phase should be in this neighborhood where there's already such a strong environmental justice movement. And building from there, we can spread that energy to areas that today are very far away from any kind of human inhabitation. So we went from places that were looking like this. The high school students came back and made a coming soon sign trying to communicate what they thought was going to be most important to the spirit of this place. And so far, we've built out about 20 acres, which is about a $35 million public investment. Here you see, looking over the first two segments, that's City Hall with the gold dome. And you might say, why is this boardwalk orange? Well, it's not just because the mayor wears orange ties or Agent Orange or the color of Wequahic High School. It's a multi-layered symbolic system that is accreted onto this. And now it's used in all other kinds of ways with other messages. And so this space, as we designed it, we wanted it to reflect the spirit of the movements that brought it to life. People said, we fought for 20 years for a little bit of riverfront access. We don't want just a nice park and for people to forget the story. And it's important that it's an anti-racist space. So much of the development has been driven by an agenda of white supremacy in a generalized structural sense that we try to push back against. So some of those narratives we really wanted to bring to the surface. So as you enter the park, you start to see clues about some of the spirits that lie there. You look down and you see inscriptions like the amazing poem that you probably know by Langston Hughes about rivers in an Afrocentric worldview. You can also see the listing of all of the public and private sources of funds that went into the park. As you go down to the river's edge, you start to see this railing that every once in a while is inscribed with a story. Like, for example, what is that big pipe sticking out into the river? Oh, well, to understand that, you have to understand combined sewer overflow. And understand that, you have to understand a little bit about the history of sewers in Newark, like most places. First, there wasn't a sewer. Then they built a pipe that basically went to the river, which worked for a while, but got pretty stinky fast. Then they built a water treatment plant, and that worked pretty well, except when it rained, and then it overflowed with untreated sewage back into the river. And that's why today, I bet some of you are involved in issues to take things off of stormwater treatment, to have rain barrels, et cetera. Other stories include some of the industrial archaeology and the spirits that came from that, or the fish and wildlife, like this crab that says, "Do not eat me, I am poisonous." So these become places where these stories are transmitted and reactivated, sometimes contested. Someone took this into their own hands to complain about a gas-powered fuel plant. There's also these narrative logs that come out of the same set of narratives. So we had to pay about $3 million to take metal out of the ground from a former smelting use. And we were able, therefore, to learn about the social history of this use, from the technology to the fights about labor unions. We commemorated actual living memories. So we had living people being like, "You got my hairstyle wrong. Fix it, please." But this is what allows us to connect to this rich soil of civic life in the city. We have public art projects that celebrate the complexity of Newarkness, that try to locate this place in relation to an overall citywide imaginary. But all of that physical stuff is only the second in importance. Much more important is the programming. Every time we open a new piece of park, we have a walk to the water, led by the Malcolm X Shabazz Marching Band, the baddest marching band in Newark. People who do cool things all over the city come at least to this one place once a year to share the cool things that they do, whether it be traditional dances or certain kinds of music or interesting graphic design that now comes to cohabitate with the world of the Orange Boardwalk. We built the first publicly accessible boat dock in about 100 years, and in fact, Latino and Black people love boating. We have every kind of program that we can muster, whether it's gospel or my favorite, house music on Friday nights with DJ Omar Abdallah, and then maybe on Sunday morning you go and have a first baptism. So this becomes a place in the life of the city. And as we go forward, the initiative gets the support of much larger and more influential organizations. And recently they've put out, and I'm happy to share it with you, this piece of literature that explains things like what is a Superfund site or how do actually new parks get built. It takes the traditional view of the city going towards New York City and tries to flip it around to really show the riverfront in detail so you can see, again, the components of this life force. But there's challenges, whether it's Hurricane Sandy or more bad ideas from the Army Corps, real estate developers looking to capitalize on this public investment and gentrify the city, and maybe even push out those people that fought against those shipping containers to get riverfront access. So if we're gonna have a party to change the world, it's gonna have to be a pretty good one with pretty different types of people there. Maybe it's gonna look something like this. to bring this to a conclusion, first party's coming up in 2 weeks. I hope that today I've convinced you that if you're going to have that party, you shouldn't have separate parties for conservation, for organizing, and for design. That all of these are going to be really important guests at that soiree that you put together to change the world. So thank you very much.